Well, we've got the clock ticking in the top left corner, Tim. So you know what that means. It is Beard Banter, episode 40. I have my friend Tim Golden with me. And everybody that's been at Beard Banter before, please chat, say hello in the comments as we get started here. We'd love to address your chats. We also may be willing to bring you on to add to this conversation if you just feel really passionately about it. Anybody that's not familiar with this show, if you put your stuff down in chat, we'll definitely connect and communicate with you and talk to you about it during this. But Tim, why don't you introduce yourself real quick, and then we'll get going on what the premise of today's show topic is.
Hey, Matt, thanks for having me on. So Tim Golden, founder at Compliance Risk and also MSP CTO as well. So kind of dual role, working in the MSP and building out compliance risk. So rather not get into all my gory details, but my heart is to be able to try to help the MSP community level up and take the knowledge that I have over the 17 years of dealing with all this and teaching you the next generation of MSPs.
Yeah, it's well said, man. And I've gotten to work with you now over the last, I guess, 3 years, probably 2.5, 3 years from our COVID support group during the beginning of that time, if you will, right? But we got talking the other day, and there was a post that came up, and it was talking about compliance as a service and talking about shared responsibility. And I'd like to ask you kind of before we get going, what does compliance as a service mean to you? And then I'm going to bring up Matt GPT here in a second to give at least that current answer. Everybody that's here, Heath, great to see you, buddy. Heath has a really cool company dealing with passwordless and some really neat identity things being solved. Good to see you as well, Brad.
Oh, hey,
all right,
Brad.
let's go, Tim. Answer my question. What does it mean to you?
What does CaaS mean to me? Confusion as a service?
Cauliflower as a service, I think, is probably what I would have taken it as.
Right? I actually prefer candy as a service, right? Because I got the sweet tooth going on. But
sure.
I think, well, I probably can't say that, but I can use the reference, right? I don't know what it is, but I'll tell you when I see it.
Sure. Okay, fair. Yeah, and Topper's in the audience too, so I'd love to get anyone that's here in chat, pop in like a one sentencer of what is compliance as a service, right? What does this mean? I mean, if you're in the mid enterprise space, if you're living in that world already, you kind of already see players that are doing some things like this and calling it compliance as a service. And while I'm waiting on everybody to pop in, I'll go ahead and go with the Matt GPT answer of this, right? Compliance as a service is a cloud-based service, which I don't know that I fully agree it's by nature cloud-based, but I will say it definitely is delivered via cloud and SaaS applications that assist businesses in meeting compliance regulations and standards. And I love that secondary part of this. CaaS providers offer various services, including risk assessment, policy development, training, potentially monitoring, reporting, tailored to specific industries or compliance areas. CaaS helps businesses save time and money by outsourcing compliance management to third-party providers and ensuring compliance with the latest regulatory requirements to avoid legal and financial penalties. And in a lot of ways, when you're talking about pure compliance, I think that's fairly an accurate statement, right? But we're growing and seeing in that thematically. And just so y'all know, this was just a quick Chat GPT lookup and then shortened to have the conversation of what it thought. There's no Matt GPT, unfortunately. But the point is compliance as a service to me is a growing understanding and agreement that we don't have the expertise inside most organizations. The tooling doesn't exist in most places. But how is it different than just a GRC platform or service, Tim? When they call it just a cloud-based service, what's different? What's the delineation between a GRC and compliance as a service?
So for us, right? So a governance, risk, and compliance, a GRC tool is one piece of the process in our compliance as a service. For us, it all starts with the people, right? The human behind it, right? So having those professionals like yourself, like myself, like Matt Topper that's in comments, like having those professionals that have the knowledge and the history, and again, I hate to say clout, to actually understand what compliance means, backed up by process, and then the tools to support that, right? We see, or at least I've been seeing, a lot of confusion in both the MSP space and in the compliance space with my thing is compliance as a service. And I'm like, no, that's just security awareness training. Or no, that's just a glorified Excel spreadsheet or whatever. Like, with the lack of a, accepted, standardization on what it actually is, it's the Wild West, right? So
Yeah.
for right now, what I'm seeing is it's the Wild West. What differentiates, I think, in part, is the people and the process.
Right. So you're really leaning into it being the human capital of this
Mhm,
delivered vis-a-vis the automation capabilities. Right,
mhm,
and I think, to the point of what is the gap, Matt Topper, and just back to your point, you had said, Matt Topper's here and compliance professional. So even though my title has the word compliance in it, I do not want to be disingenuous. Matt Topper owned the compliance end of our world from a knowledge perspective when we worked together. So I don't
yeah,
want to steal any glory from him, nor any of the non-ADHD perspective, as a good friend of mine, Josh, says, that
mhm,
would prevent me from being the guy that owns that aspect of it. But anybody that wants to jump in this call today and chat about this, we're kind of doing a new thing. I have a link for you. You can just message me on LinkedIn, and I'll be glad to send it to you if you want to jump in and have this conversation. But when we talk about compliance as a service, I think there's a couple of components. Right now, there's a giant gap in what even compliance means to most people in the
yeah,
SMB and MSP market, right?
mhm, mhm.
And I believe that's one of the big points. Oh, Tim Sure popped in with
Hey, Tim.
configure. Oh, go ahead. Oh, Tim, yeah.
Hey, Tim.
Configuration compliance is a little different from what you're talking about, and Polygon focuses people, process, et cetera. Help me understand what he means by that. I assume you know Tim than Tim.
Hey, thanks for the plug. So yeah, when we talk about configuration compliance, right? Like I'll break it down to like the easiest term, configuration, right?
Okay.
Baseline configuration, right? Does your machine have a box that pops up that says you are logging into a machine that's
Yeah.
probably monitored, right? That's a GPO control. There's other ways to push it up,
Intune, other methodologies, but
whatever,
yeah,
right? So
RMM,
so
a bunch
that
of things.
in my head, like that's a configuration control, right? A configuration portion. And you look at CIS, you look at NIST, there's all kinds of those STIGs that do that thing, right?
Good reference to Stigs. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you could even take it a step further, right? You know, when we think CMMC or we think HIPAA, right? Or any
Yeah.
of these control frameworks, a lot of what we're seeing in the space is I want to check in a box. I want to check in a box. I want to check in a box. And that's not really, in my opinion, compliance as a service, right? It's
Okay.
more of a business aspect. It's more of a business role with, yeah, you are iterating and getting checks in a box along the way, but how are we as an MSP being that consultant to the business? People,
Yeah.
process, and then everything else around that.
And I think what you're really speaking towards, so I'd go out on a limb and say that as an MSP delivering traditional technology solutions, you are being commoditized away.
Yep.
Right. I feel like the day to day work that it takes to support infrastructure, especially as you start going SaaS and identity centric,
Mhm.
is making that value prop drop, and that the overall SKU price of its value is going down. But I would say that this is an avenue where the growth is actually pretty much nascent and in the very beginning of its growth stage to encompass that difference, right? If you're charging 250 a head for your clients to do IT work, and less of that value is being provided in that 250, I feel like there's a shift towards compliance services and managing those. Now, one of the gaps is when you are, and I'll call out what Heath says, like it also has to map to what you're trying to comply to. Most SMBs don't have any
That's right.
compliance on them, right? And you see that shifting, right? Look at Australia. Australia was, along with the UK, were quick to go in with the Essential 8 and the Cyber Essentials. When you start thinking about the growth of what is compliance, I feel like we're in an early stage of the opportunity and greenfield opportunity there, right? Where, if you look at what
Yeah.
UK's proposed of businesses have to comply to these certain basic things to be a business, and I think you see the winds of change coming in our world where that compliance might be easier said in maintaining an insurance and insurability, right? If you think about that
Mhm.
crosswalk to saying, yes, I have MFA on everything, and people being sued for not having this machine with MFA, you get into, boy, configuration compliance would have been very important to that. And I think MSPs get that, right? I don't think anybody in the chat would argue that MSPs can't do configuration monitoring and configuration status monitoring in their RMM, in Intune, in
Yeah.
AD, those things.
Right.
But I think compliance takes that a step further of being able to gather the evidence that proved you checked it being able to gather the evidence that proved you followed those reviews, that did those
Right.
things. And I think that's where there's a lot of opportunity for services from MSPs. In the chat, tell me what your thoughts are on that. But I think there's opportunities for services of MSPs to say, I'm going to start owning and managing this for you to ensure that you're meeting that.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have the comment up there from Heath about the FTC safeguards rules, and we've done a bunch of different webinars and a bunch of different content around what that means to MSPs and what it means to their small businesses. And this is just one of many things that are coming down the pipeline. We can no longer say compliance is coming. We need to start
Yeah.
shifting that. Compliance is here, and it's not just a check in a box, right? So we take, as in our MSP, a pretty proactive approach with setting the precedent with our client that, listen, it needs to start with your documentation. Say what you do, make sure what you say, what you're doing aligns to whatever regulatory or legal requirements you need to adhere to. And then, as Matt just pointed out, prove that you're doing
Yeah.
that, you say what you're doing, right? And so there's all different ways to do that, but FTC safeguard rules, it's here. June is like now, right?
Yeah.
Right around the
Came a
corner.
lot quicker this
And
year than I thought it did last year. That's for sure.
it did. It did. And yeah, cyber insurance is, they've been a big driving force the last, 18,
Yeah.
24, 36 months. And, you know, the regulatory bodies in our federal government are starting to catch up.
Yeah, I agree. And you're going to start seeing things make it more broadly applicable, right? Let's get in with, I saw a great comment come in, and then I saw another great comment. So this is going to be rough. So you've got, coming in from Steve Kazan saying, is the phrase, as opposed to the question, is the phrase compliance as a service being used to describe the automation of the compliance process to accelerate policy creation, pen testing, adherence, tracking, and attestation auditing, et cetera? Yeah, 100%. And I would actually even go in my mind to describing it further as, we've already done that. At least the automation, iteration, W2 multiplication, scale or force multiplication. That's what MSPs have done. That's how they made MSPs. Right. That was the whole benefit of it. I can get my reactive hours per endpoint per month and my overall cost down and make it more efficient, automate more, be more. So I think, yes, to your question, Steve, I don't know if that was a loaded question, but I agree wholeheartedly. There's enough comments coming in. You guys are going to make the whole show. This is fantastic. I love it. Tim Schur popped back in and also said cybersecurity is shifting to an evidence-based activity. I think in a lot of ways, right? Not just why evidence, third parties, supply chain risk, all of the things, but you have this shift where it's not just evidence in that way, but also from a reasonability perspective. If I'm going to have to say to from a lawsuit perspective or from whatever it may be, of yes, I failed and they got in, because they're always going to get in to some extent. How did I do things to limit the damage? How did I do things to actually meet policy and change that I learned from things and matriculate, right? Matt Topper and I used to have an after action review of every incident where we'd go through and matriculate through what could we have done better? How could we have been better?
Exactly.
And so I think evidence, to the spirit of it, but also just proof that you're growing and being reasonable is becoming the basis, whether that's tied to a direct compliance or whether that's tied to just even look at the lawsuits in that respect around, Rackspace, for example. There's a lot of things coming from that regard. So,
it's around the word that I love is do care,
yeah,
right? Are you
do care? Exactly.
do care, right? Are you use the word defensibility a lot, Matt, as well, and I love that word as well. So are you doing your due care, your due process, and building that defensibility? And a lot of that can be automated, pieces of that can be automated, but if you don't start at the very beginning of these are my requirements that I need to adhere to,
or at least what I said I'm going to adhere to, and the way I wrote it, to the spirit of the way I wrote it, to the way that I'm intending to accomplish it, those get into the the other pieces of that. Matt Topper says, listen, it's helping with those recurring compliance tasks is an opportunity to put the service provider back in the MSP beyond selling and installing things. 100%. 100%. And it's something you couldn't readily expect a person not affiliated with the technology, because let's face it, technical still comes in at least 50% in most control families, right? And in the ability and facilities to do that. But I think you touch on another point of that means we have to be in the business, doesn't it, Mr. Topper? In the sense that, and Tim, we have to be able to say, hey, I need to actually help you with your policies. I need to actually make sure you're following them. I need to actually find some way to collect that you're following them. I need your participation. And I think that's why you
Right.
always see platforms and SaaS platforms involved. You have to have that central communication point that allows for that matriculation and management of that evidence and that policy, if that makes sense.
We're starting, as we always have, is the evolution of the MSP, right? And this is just yet the next iteration of the IT service
Yep.
provider, right?
Agreed.
So we start with the whole break fix, right? And we go, hey, we can get more efficient and charge a monthly fee. So we go to managed services, and then the cyber liability stuff starts getting in. Like, it's just the sort of, as an MSP, we always want to grow, right?
Yeah.
We're always iterating and
No,
changing with the
stop,
time.
stop. As a freaking business, we want
As a
to grow,
business,
period.
yeah,
If you're not in business to make money or serve a mission from a charitable perspective, then what are you
yeah.
doing? So let's just be completely candid. That doesn't just stop with us on our ability to grow.
Doesn't
That's those
start with
end
stuff.
customers
Well,
too. Yeah, sorry.
the point I was trying to make was to try to shift away from the ones and zeros, the nuts and
Yep,
bolts, and the plugging in of mice to a true business partner,
absolutely. Yeah.
right? When I approach an SMB, very large restaurant chain here in New Hampshire. I won't tell you who they are, but I eat there frequently. Very well known, and they're now in their fourth generation. Had a conversation with them, and they were like, "Hey, we just want to get rid of our server." Well, great. I can do break fix. I can come in and get rid of the server, recycle it, use the program at scale pad and plant
Hit
a
it with a
tree, blah, 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 blah.
sledgehammer a la Office Space, like all the
All that fun
things.
stuff.
Yeah.
But I want to be your strategic business partner. I can tell that your Zoom isn't working that well, which means your Wi-Fi is not working that well. Like, what are you using for a Wi-Fi device? Oh, I don't know. I got this blue thing with these funny looking antennas.
WRT
I was like,
54G.
boom. And so, and that's the shift that us as MSPs, like,
Yeah.
being that true business partner, right? Helping them gain the efficiencies, building the defensibility, getting them safe, getting them secure.
Yep.
So,
And as usual, Mr. Topper hits it on the head with about a quarter of the words I would use to do it. So let's bring it to a Brad Grossian answer, which is very closer to the way I would write things. Brad says, agreed. Many SMBs aren't subject to statutory compliance requirements, but might be subject to other compliance requirements from insurance companies, to the point we made earlier. PCI extensibility, right? Even as you look at the new PCI DSS rules, like, holy heck, it's a big difference,
yeah,
right?
great.
So you look at that. I think he's hit the nail on the head. I have to read it this way. Tim's clearly the guy who can handle statutory compliance regs, but also handle the config compliance that might be needed for non-statutory rules. And I think that's the point we're making, right?
Thanks,
The phase also includes closing of loopholes, which is a major facet of that. It's also an alignment conversation, right? To ensure that the business is aligning with the things that they set out to do. You said it kind of well of, what do you want to do with the server? Why? What does it matter? What are the things? What are the other things that come into this? Like that
Yeah.
aspect of it, and tying business and technical needs and operational processes to the things that you're held required to. And I think, to your point, maybe this is just speculation, but we're definitely going to see more and more of these types of regulations and things come out that might mean you have cross applicability to 6 or 7 governing bodies potentially, or different things, especially if you look at, let's just say, back to Iconic. And Matt Topper, I'd love for you to point in on this. What if every one of those states that we were in now has a separate privacy legislation, now has a separate,
do.
I know. And so the point is, when you start seeing those play out and you get in, now I understand privacy is typically not as compliance oriented. It's usually outcome oriented, but there is an understanding of, this ability to meet the kind of hold harmless, or what's the term called, Brad, if you want to pop it in, but safe harbor, sorry, was the term I was looking for. But how much does the compliance as a service go towards meeting safe harbor from these more arbitrary things like what's being proposed and some of the safeguard rules?
Yeah, I could probably talk about this for several hours.
I'll
Right? So
cut you off, I promise.
let me distill it down, right? So, yeah, what's there, 47 some odd states right now with privacy laws on the books, and the difference between privacy and compliance, and actually compliance has pieces of, like, it just can get pretty cumbersome. What I always tend to suggest with their MSPs is start doing some of this work on yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Dedicate 30 minutes a week. We're all busy. We can never find time to do stuff.
Okay,
but
I'm going to put you on the spot. What are some of those things they can do? What are those
I'm
things?
getting
Let's get there. You know me, I'm fast forward.
getting
Okay, I
there.
got
I'm getting there. I wanted to make the point that here we are, 15 minutes in, love bantering with all of you guys. Stay for the next 30 minutes, but then dedicate the next 30 minutes after that. And these are the things I want you to do. I want you to go to CISA or Google CSAT. They have a tool. CISA has a tool that can walk you through the framework of CIS, right? Matt, if you have the link, that would be great to share it up here. In start with control one, IG1, do an inventory on yourself, right? But I would say take that inventory a step further because our RMMs have inventory, but we're lazy. I want you to actually take the time to review that inventory. Are there duplicate devices in there? Are there devices that have been long since gone? Review that inventory from a hardware perspective, right? All these great tools, all these RMM pieces that we have, right? You want to talk compliance as a service? Talk to your customer about all the devices listed in their stuff and get them to review it at least on a quarterly basis.
Now, and I can tell you why at a real traction level that matters is if you think about the ICS lawsuit with the rescission of that insurance policy from Travelers last year, it was all tied to, you didn't tell us about that server that didn't have MFA. Why? Well, because it wasn't on an asset list or it wasn't described. And I think the point is, Brian Wheeler, I love you, buddy. You're coming up early in the comments. I got a bunch ahead of you, but I'm pulling it up. Best point. Pull up the framework. Start with number one. Like, I feel like you're
Perfect.
being a bit John Madney right now, Tim. So point one, taken, right? Pull up the framework, start with one. But what specifically, Matt popped in. I'm gonna go in. Matt, what would I have done? What would I have done? Nice. Yeah, exactly. I do love what Matt Topper have done. Created our own control framework with inputs from those state regulations combined. I think of specific regulations as you need to have this versus this is everything to do. The latter is different for every organization. I love that. I want to unpack that just a little bit. Tim, so this is me when I asked Matt earlier, what would he have done if he had 46 different states that all had privacy legislations? I think is this basically just your word of saying it's kind of a crosswalk, your own framework that is that crosswalk, Matt? I'm assuming that's how I'd take it. You, Tim?
Yeah, when I see the words create your own framework, I kind of cringe a little because, we live in the world of where there is no one standard, there's 5,000 standards. But to Matt's point, yeah, with, don't quote me, 46 states, 47 states and their own privacy frameworks, like, thank goodness there are some tools that can help with that cross map. And there probably are more tools coming that can talk about the cross mapping of these things,
Agreed.
right?
Agreed.
I won't throw out any names or any vendors because I want to keep it agnostic. But as Matt said, Matt Topper,
yeah, the real Matt,
as Matt, the other Matt, said, start someplace, right? I love the you need to have versus to do, right? Have versus to do, right? To do is like action. I'm all about like
well, and I think he's also meaning summatively, this isn't everything. This is one of the components. Like if you think about a minimum viable product or a minimum requirement, these are things that become minimum requirements because you're now in California, or become minimum requirements because you're now in Texas. At least if I've understood him correctly on that point.
Or you're serving clients in those locations,
yeah,
right?
100%.
So here I am in Podunk, New Hampshire, and I have clients in California. You know what? California privacy protection applies to what we're doing. So great. I got to get my house in order against CPAA, right? Like, because I have clients that have data in California.
Yeah. I got 2 points I want to read out because they won't fit on the screen. So we got a long-winded matter here. But Tim Sure says, listen, if the service provider misses this opportunity, they're going to be involved in the compliance program via questionnaires and meetings with an outsourced compliance partner. I think that's a perfect point that I'm going to come back to in just a sec. Also likely not getting adequately compensated. Agreed. You're getting to do work for nothing. The service provider might as well step up. They know the customers, they know the systems, configs, even data flows. Tim, you're like reading from my notebook of why MSSP and MSP are converging in that same definition, and also why that compliance as a service aspect might in its same way be converging along the IT control plane. But in the same breath, you then go on to Steve saying, which I can post this one up, says, good point. Don't MSPs providing security get insurance or SOC SOC questionnaire request every week or month? Yep. Everybody listening to this call as an MSP has filled out an insurance questionnaire or some form of fashion recently, and probably has even started filling out these long 300 questionnaires. Or do you have a SOC 2? Or do you have, so you're getting more and more from the commercial side of it, aren't we, Tim?
I'll even pause you right there. I literally just got off the phone with one of our clients who their A133 auditor, their financial auditor, called me and started asking me a litany of questions. Do you suspect fraud? Is anybody stealing from the company? Like, wait a minute, I just do their IT. What?
Yeah.
Are people following policy? Like,
Oof.
so I'm even seeing like the financial auditors, the CPA firms calling the IT service provider, calling the IT departments and asking these questions, even well beyond insurance.
Do you think there is a component where this cannot just be done as a service? This has to be a co-delivered service. Like, would you say that's the case? As an MSP, can you deliver this in a vacuum without the partner doing their part and adding in?
Well, it comes down to, do you have the people, right? So do you have a CIO or a CISO on the staff that gets it?
Right.
And then the process and the tools to back it up.
Well,
right?
and specifically, I mean more down to the tactical, technical, right? If you have to pull proof or you have to do things, your question back from the auditor that says, "Are people following policies?" How do you prove that? Where does that happen, right? How do you say yes, someone's following a policy? Help me understand that.
Polygon. Sorry, shameless.
Well, let's just say, and I do take away from that. I'm actually going to go and manually downvote this video for you. No, but seriously, like, how do you answer that question?
So yeah, I mean, you make a really good point, right? And so, okay, platform aside, my SaaS aside, right?
That's
Let's
two,
take,
Tim. I'm
for
gonna kick you off
example,
in one more. Don't do it again.
let's take it, for example, the most basic thing, and that is a password policy.
Okay.
If you have a password policy and you follow the NIST standards, right? And then you set up your Intune or GPO or whatever appropriately to match the standards, you can back that policy up by the actual
Totally.
configuration in place.
Yeah, totally. I get those technical controls. I guess the one I'd love to delve in your mind a little more on is, what about when it's administrative? What about when it's something like list new software providers or list service providers, right? This is now they bring in an HVAC company. And I know we're getting back towards your platform. I tease about kicking you off. But I think the conversation is, and what I'm hoping to suss out of this is, as MSPs, how would you tackle knowing when someone brings on a vendor inside their world that didn't come across your surface area usually, right? You're not part of when they choose a new HVAC vendor and now that HVAC vendor wants to slap a machine on there. You get called in when they want to
Yeah,
slap a machine on there, but you don't get
we
involved
do.
in that part. So how do you work with a partner to have that conversation? And I think you can talk about platforms in general, Tim, just not yours, but what would you envision in a platform like that? Right? It would have some
So
degree of a component where we share information and I send them tasks and then they have to
yeah,
approve those tasks, right? Is that essentially how that plays out?
yeah, I would see like your great HVAC scenario, right? And so when we set up a new client and onboard a new client and we have a vendor due diligence process and policy in place, right? And we work with them on, hey, we want to swap accounting softwares. They know, as they're, because they've been trained and they've been reminded of, this is how we do this thing. And one of those steps in this thing is call IT and get them involved in the conversation, even if it's at the very beginning. And if IT doesn't need to be involved, they'll tell you and bow out. But this has happened to me so many times. I have moved companies, moved offices, moved this. And so one of the things that I do now with onboarding is, I want a copy of your lease. I at least want a copy of the dates that those leases renew, so that when they come up, we can renegotiate moving your building, HVAC in the building, like all of those little pieces that we don't think about, but we should be involved in.
And I think that's maybe the answer I was hoping to get to, which is you have to be deeper in their world. You have to be deeper in their operational process. You either have to have it, as someone said, I think it was Josh Buckley said, right? This is going to be the VCIO, right? Can support clients in an MSP providing VCIO and CO, co-delivery support of the service. Yeah, you would
Mhm.
use that as how you get that arm and the buy-in and the seat at the table and the understanding of what we need to do. And I think it's a combination of VCIO, a combination of, to your point, hey, when do you renew your lease? Why? Because I want to know about 2 months in advance so we can start realizing, are you
Right,
going to stay here or are we going to move? Because if so, maybe this is an opportunity to do this network project, or maybe we're going to have to move this stuff. We need to plan it and getting into those things. But it also gets
right.
into change control. It also gets into all kinds of things, right? I don't mean to pull your string, but that's one of those things where being deeper in the business is going to be how we deliver this in that way. Um,
Right. And you know what? Like I'll back up, right? Because I don't know the level of sophistication of the MSPs or those listening. I know there's really smart people
well, if they're
listening, but
listening here, they're all pretty smart, but you can do the
let's
ALI
just
5 thing.
like
It's okay.
set a baseline and reset, right? So you're a smaller MSP, you only have a couple of people, right?
Sure.
They're highly qualified technicians. They can push buttons and do ones and zeros. And you as the business owner, like you're trying to close deals, sell leads, and make payroll, right? But there are organizations and people out there that are willing to partner alongside you, not steal your business, but grow with you, right? And we see that a lot. I see a lot of, I hate to say Bob Coppage, the co-managed, like Bob is really great on the commit stuff, right? That's really great in those organizations. But having an MSP with 4 or 5 staff, co-managed with an MSSP, a VCIO, a VSO, a virtual CIO, doing co-manage together,
Mm.
right? Like the pie is big enough. We can all eat at the table. It's, getting away from the fear of, I don't want my clients to think I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't want somebody stealing my business.
So,
Great. There are lots of companies out there willing to help
so
you.
you're even speaking towards partnering B2B with MSPs to co-deliver this and create separation of duties
Yes,
conversations, right?
absolutely.
I want to tackle a
Absolutely.
couple more things. So Eric says, does compliance only matter when insurance or GC is involved, or does the compliance as a service company have any liability? Um, I'm not quite
Oh,
sure what he's asking there in this regard. But are you saying if I'm the compliance as a service? Yeah, go ahead, Tim. You tackle it in your way if you
so
get it.
so yeah, so good question, right? So does the CAS have liability? Oh, wait a minute. What was the bonus portion of this? SRM,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
so as a CAS
Did you make a
company,
plant here? Did you plant Eric Moore for this pivot point?
I did.
Okay.
As a CAS company, we're me, Matt, whoever, as a CAS company, one of the things I'm going to expect from them is what is the shared responsibility? Where is my
Yeah.
work line? Where is your work line? And what are we doing in the
Well,
middle?
and yeah, to your point, they're not even lines, right? When you think about shared responsibility matrix, and I'm a big advocate of watching this continue to develop, right? SRM is pretty well defined from a cloud perspective. At least it's yours, right? One
Yeah.
sidedly, I tease. But when you think about shared responsibility matrix, you get into this understanding of it's not one sided. Right? Take patching, for example. Let's say we need to patch, and our compliance somewhere says patch within X period of time, right? Or something to that effect. Well, there's
Yeah.
pieces of that are mine. There's pieces that are the clients, right? And those aren't just here. This is all you. They're more racy matrix, right? We have a responsible, accountable, consulted and informed. And each piece of this
Mhm.
might have people on both sides responsible. So I might be responsible as an MSP to do the automation of the patching, to validate that the patching happened, and now as a compliance guy to gather evidence that the patching happened, right to that
Yep.
point. But it
Yep.
might be on the client side to define a patching window. It might be on the client side to
Right.
support patching windows that people have devices on, that they're actually doing the reboots, that they're actually listening to those things. I did a post this morning about that. It,
I'll take it.
yeah,
I'll take it another level deep, right? And fourth party risk, because you might not always have a patch for that tool or that software or that thing, right? So you're talking fourth party risk, right? So having those clear delineations of this is what I'm responsible for, this is what the client is responsible for, and like you said, the racy matrix, right?
yeah,
Who's accountable, who's informed, all of that stuff. Yeah.
yeah, and that's my point. We can't. I'm not going to dive into this. I'm actually getting into responsibility with Brad Gross on the game here. gosh, in a couple days. So we'll dig into this a little more. But I think that's an
Nice.
ever changing kind of part of this right now. So late to the conversation, we got Mr. I think it is President Bergeron. I think is the new title. I may be wrong on that.
Right.
Might be a little over aggrandizing. But late to the party, great conversation. If you look at all the new cybersecurity guidelines and the latest zero trust frameworks the feds are putting out, it's a lot of governance. You're looking at opportunity for high margin, much needed service, and potentially, right, you can combine that with the lack of cybersecurity experts, potential legal issues for your clients, some potatoes, and you got a stew going. I do love you, Roddy Bergeron. You took me on a real journey there and made me get to the very end of it. So thank you. But yeah, agreed, right?
Mhm.
Like I think there's just huge opportunity here. And I think when you come to your point of SRM, is Brian pops in and says, "I love the separation of duties, hands off of risk profile to checking the box yes to someone that makes it their business to understand what 100% yes really means." And I think that's your point of bringing in experts, right, Wheeler?
Right.
And I'm running
Mhm.
short on time, so I don't want to miss anybody's comment. Eric says wasn't a plug, but making the magic happen. Yeah, fair. To the point though, when you start thinking about compliance and then the combination of this understanding of SRM, I think you'll see extension of what that compliance as a service is to even is this business that I am supporting, right? This end client consumer of my MSP slash compliance as a service services, are they
Mhm.
compliant with their own shared responsibilities? And I think you're going to start seeing that play out more and more, especially in the mid market and
Yeah.
separation. Who said that earlier? I missed this. It was a pop up by goodness gracious. There was another one talking about how it's moving upstream. I think it might have been Topper. Anyways, yeah, it was Heath Spencer said, we're aware of supply chain mandates coming down the pipe where the large companies are going to start requiring compliance to framework to be able to be a vendor to them in B2B relationship, complying to some,
Yep.
heck, we've been seeing that for a while, right, Heath? I mean,
Yep.
even without the guidelines, I remember the first time I saw a medical company get asked for their information about their compliance with 800-171. And it's like, what? What are you even grasping at straws here for? Like, this is an upstream vendor going, are you compliant with 800-171? No, we're not. We actually don't handle CUI for the most part. There's not a lot of,
Right.
FCI floating around in our environment for working on your broken leg. Um, yeah, and I guess a little bit of personal sharing here for everybody that's listening. My wife was not very compliant to her safety protocols of elbow pads yesterday, and crashed
Oh,
her bicycle, and now has a chunk of Katura flesh missing in the middle of the streets where we were riding. So, but the point being,
sorry.
yeah, it sucks. It's been a long night last night, but
Yeah. But did you have a policy in place to make sure on your checklist that said helmet, sunglasses, water bottle, elbow
you know
pads?
what? I did not. I had one for helmet. I had one for water bottle. I had one for that. But up to this point, she has
So let's do
accepted
an
the
after
risk of
action
no elbow
report,
pads. Yes, so that was an
right?
accepted
So
risk.
your ARR now should state lessons learned,
Yeah,
add elbow and knee
yeah,
pads to.
exactly. So, thoughts on compliance as a service? Let's tackle the really elephant in the room. Do you charge extra for it? Do MSPs right now charge extra? What are the margins like? Roddy kind of tapped on it, and Roddy, maybe you throw this in here as an answer too. But do MSPs charge extra for this right now?
Personally, I think they do. I think it is a separate section of the business,
Yeah,
right? And this is literally how we do this, right? Our stack is our stack, and this is the stuff, and this is the fee, and it's per thing,
per
per
X. Yeah, the
whatever,
way
right?
MSPs do that's
X, right?
multifaceted.
But then we bake on a VCSO,
Okay.
right? Or compliance as a service. And in that compliance as a
So are
service,
you
we have two.
combining vCISO and compliance as a service as a 1-2 action arm, or calling them kind of the same thing? Is that the thought process in your
Yeah,
iteration?
kind of call them the same thing because while pieces of the compliance of a service are in our stack,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and
Uh,
I would even argue
training,
that when you look at enterprise world, the CISO isn't also always the compliance arm. In fact, you find yourself with a bit of a natural separation of duties where the CISO is the one making decisions and driving the world. And in our vCISO definition, they're the advisor, right? They may not be the
yep,
executive decision maker, but they're definitely the advisor and the person that drives it
right,
forward. So is
right.
compliance lumped in with vCISO, or is compliance a third party check and balance to that vCISO's asks and efficacy for the projects, if that makes sense? So,
Yeah, and that's a really great point and a really good delineation, right? I would say that most MSPs can't have both, right? They want to be able to afford both. So again, back to that partnership, that co-managed thing, like having a third party objective organization in the VCSO role, working hand in hand with the VCSO role, like as the VCSO, advising and being the business partner, but then checks and balances,
Yeah.
right? Having a third party, like, yes, I've attested to what they're doing. I prove, yeah, I would say that that's a really good separation of those kinds of duties.
Yeah, and if we've only got 4 minutes, but just postulating out loud, if you think about it, when the IT company is turning the wrench to the efforts and orders of the projects that are hopefully coming out of that vCISO conversation, right? When you're hardening the infrastructure, when you're, to your point, implementing that GPO policy for my pop-up screen that says, "Hey, this is a system that's not yours, Matt Lee. Don't take advantage of that." Right? When you're
Mhm.
doing those things and putting those in, is the person that validates, should that person be on the same team and under the same payment structure? And I think you get into an argument for separation of duties that Matt Topper and I tried to maintain in our world, where people had certain ability to turn the wrench, but someone else had the validation infrastructure and ask of that. Um,
Yeah. So
yeah,
I love the turn the wrench because 13 years as a mechanic,
fair,
right?
fair.
So anytime I would do something on a vehicle at the dealership and I would go through and do all my stuff and turn it in and be like, here you go, I would hand it to the shop foreman who would QA
Yep,
it, check my work, make sure there's no, oh, you forgot to put the oil cap. Like I would hand it to somebody that wasn't me,
yep.
who didn't help with the work at
And
all.
did they write something down as to say that they looked at it? You know what that's
Yes.
called?
That was
That's compliance. I didn't know if you checked that. It's not just QA, it is compliance, right? You're validating
it.
that something happened. And you want to be able to say that they don't have a conflict of interest, right? That the conflict of interest is only being paid, and therefore we're going to say, yes, you met compliance. And I think that's an argument of, if I was to do this inside my own MSP, I would want to have a separation of that infrastructure and duties, where the person that answers to and validates those checks, just like in your shop foreman, he can tell you, no, Tim,
Mhm.
you didn't do it right. You need to send it back, and that not be a giant business conflict, right? And did
Right.
that ever happen? I would imagine at some point the foreman had to say,
Oh,
Tim, you screwed up, buddy. Get back to her. Yeah, yeah.
oh
You
yeah,
shouldn't have three
plenty of
extra
time,
washers. That's not okay.
plenty of time, plenty of time. But yeah, they used to call it QA, call it whatever, but like having the checks and balances, right? And we do a lot of that just in our own business, right? Just in our
Oh
own
man, I'm telling
MSP,
you.
like, right? And it, like, we do it out of habit, not because out of necessity, but taking that to the next level and be like, these are the controls that were in place. This is the person that did them, and then somebody validating them. Oh, wait, there's this thing called CMMC and third party assessors. Like, yes,
So Roddy's going to wrap us up here because I do have to go teach a class on CIS for the next 2 hours. And
yeah,
actually, first, let me let Josh give a shameless plug to Threat Locker. I don't hate Danny; he's my buddy. So there you go. It's out there. How many
yeah.
companies in the states are utilizing Threat Locker as hardening? Josh, just know that the 6 people that watch this might answer this for you, but that's probably it. Moving fives of minds here, boys and girls. No, so Roddy answers back 100% at charge extra. You need someone who understands it, and that person isn't cheap, right? Think of it this way:
Yep.
Sheldon is not an inexpensive, right? And I knew what you meant, Roddy, on expert in a specific competency. But I'll go on and finish reading this. He says, your workload as the compliance officer, whether that be VCISO, VCSO, whatever it is, extremely different than traditional fractional work we're used to. Dude, 100%. Call it out, Roddy. You might need to jump in on this next time. The effort you have put in to understand business processes means you can't take on that large amount of clients per compliant officer, which means high dollar, high margin consulting professional services. If you specify in a specific competency, charge even more. And I knew what you meant by that. And I think
Mhm.
the argument he's making is 100% correct. And where I think the
Yep.
scale can be made is that there's a gap. And, to your point, Tim, we say keep separations of duties and have a third party compliance as a service. What if that MSP used the same tools, the same collection methods, and then could also take that data into a compliance as a service partner and have that data
Yep.
mean, to your point, hey, there is a GPO, there is an Intune policy. And so you're starting to see where that you could lessen the workload to Roddy, to your point, to allow those professionals to live in their business rather than dealing with the plate spinning matriculation of what is compliance, if that
Exactly.
makes sense.
Exactly. I think give it 3 to 5 to 10 years. Stuff's coming.
Yeah, there's cool stuff. 3 to 5 to 10 years is a long poke, but you're not wrong. Uh,
No, but
anyways,
the point is getting back to what you said, and I know we're going to
yep,
wrap
I got
up,
a
and I'm going
class
to
to
leave it.
teach in 1 minute.
on this nugget. Like, reach out to those in the community. There's lots of us here that are willing to help you, right? The only question that is the dumb one is the one not asked. So ask
Yeah,
it.
and I ask a lot of dumb questions
I won't
every day,
slam you,
so
but Matt
no, I will
will.
not. Thanks for y'all being here. I appreciate it. The comments have been amazing today. Thank y'all so much. I'd love to have further comments if you watch this later of, do you think compliance as a service is the next thing that MSPs are going to have to tackle? I would vote right now and say, yeah, you better get running in this position and get started. There's a lot of platforms out there and tools. There's free ones. There's spreadsheets, great partners to know like Tim Golden and his team. Also Sheldon over in California, Roddy Bergeron, Mark Menzies. There's just too many to mention, that are on this call even right now. So thank y'all so much.
Matt, thanks for the
See you,
time.
everybody.